Hi guys, how you doing? Welcome to another non-league show in conjunction with the Football Nation podcast. As always, I'm Paul and I'm your host. And tonight I bring you a little bit of a special because tonight we are talking to two Southend fans. We're talking to Perry and Greg from the Southend fans protest group, and they're going to talk to me about the owners' issues or the issues with their owners. Now, in this episode, we touch on what's happened previously, what their thoughts are on the future. We do touch on their current situation with the terms of league position as well. But honestly, if any of your clubs are going through something like this, you have my sympathy. No club should ever go through what these two guys are going through, and it is horrendous. I hope you enjoy this. It is a long one, but please stick with it. There's lots and lots of good information in there, and I will see you all in the very next episode. Right, so joining me is Perry and Greg. Greg is part of the Southend protesters group. Now, you guys have gone through a decade of mismanagement with your club. Perry, in your eyes, mate, just run me through what's happened, what's gone wrong, and how has it got to this point?
Well, yeah, it's interesting to say. Like you said, it has been a decade of pretty much mismanagement. But I think in previous cases and sort of times gone by, when we've been issued with a winding up petition from the High Court, there's always been sort of an element of optimism that it will eventually get paid. Whereas this time round, there's much greater cause for concern. Yeah, in previous times, like I said, it's been paid sort of even before the 11th hour. It's sort of got to court and then it's been paid, or it's been adjourned once and then paid. But this time it's been adjourned twice, and there's various non-payment of staff and players now. The players haven't been paid since the end of December's pay, so they haven't been paid this year so far. So yeah, it's categorically mismanagement of the chairman, basic cash flow. I think the ultimate sort of idea that fans now have is the chairman's pockets are empty. He's been relying on this £5 million bridging loan to sort of oversee the financing of the club for the next phase of, you know, where we're moving to a new training ground and planning to move to a new stadium. He's solely reliant on this £5 million loan, which is not a viable way to run a football club. If you haven't got the money in your pockets to finance it, then ultimately you need to step aside and let someone else do that. And he's made bold claims previously that there isn't really an appetite for someone to come and buy Southend United. That's been categorically disproved in the past couple of weeks. We've had a local businessman come out and pull out of his attempts to negotiate with the chairman to even have a slice of the cake. And now we're actually seeing the Shrimpers Trust have actually been in touch with an American investor as well, and tried to actually bring him to sort of the club and sort of, as a viable alternative should the worst happen, and we have to get put into administration or something like that. But yeah, ultimately it's a decade of mismanagement, and it's never been sort of more worrying than it has been now, in terms of there is genuine fear that the club could be no longer after Wednesday next week, March the 1st. So yeah, that's in summary.
So I mean, you mentioned the new stadium there, Greg. If I can bring you in on this one, mate. From what I was doing, obviously some research on this today, and from what I read, is the plan was like a 21,000 all-seater stadium. It's going to be funded with a loan of a club that's already in mass amounts of debt and facing the wall, and your owner's like, well, we'll just borrow. It doesn't make any financial sense. They want to build state-of-the-art academies. They want to, put obviously better hospitalities there. Surely the first point of call, Greg, is to pay the men and women in this club shop and the ticket office and things like that, rather than looking at a 21,000 seater stadium when you're in the National League.
Yeah, so it's an interesting first question about a decade of mismanagement, really, because the chairman actually took over a controlling interest back in 1998. So I'd probably rephrase it as, rather than a decade of mismanagement, as 25 years of contradiction.
Yeah.
In that he's a property developer at heart, and his primary focus from day one has been to develop the club's assets to his profit. So not only did he take a controlling interest in the club in '98, but shortly after he transferred all of the club's assets. Be it that was in three parts. That was the stadium, the training ground, and the surrounding land, and every fixture and fitting at Roots Hall. So, you know, the curtains, the bar stool, the ashtray, the corner flags, the goal nets, he owns the lot. We don't own it. And he transferred all that to himself. You know, he paid a nominal fee for it, but it's kind of textbook asset stripping.
Yeah, of course it is.
You know, the projections being made now of what that land is worth as development to the council in terms of homes and flats and units is multiples of hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
He devalued the stadium by 2.6 million, I believe, to pay 4 million for it and a sale and lease back under alternative use. So if you're saying, you know, the present use was as a football stadium, so a football stadium was valued at circa 6.6 million the year prior, after it was made all-seater and we developed the South Stand. You know, under an alternate use, well, what was that alternate use? If it was as housing, clearly that was more valuable than the football stadium, and yet it was valued at 2.6 million less than as a football stadium. So from day one, it's a contradiction. You know, either your priority is a sustainable football club, or it's developing the assets. And initially, when he took over in '98, there was a chairman appointed, a gentleman called John Main, who shortly was forced out / resigned in 2000. There's still an article today on the Independent, which is very good. Is that me with feedback or you?
I think that's yourself.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
So yeah. Oh, that's not. I'll try that again. Yeah. So that is rather weird, isn't it? John Main was essentially forced out, and he referred to it as a gross contradiction back then. There's a quote in the Independent, like how can you be the owner of the football club and also the owner of the assets, which you're trying to develop?
Yeah.
And neither of those things go together for sustainability of the football club.
No, of course.
So to your point around the football stadium, like I think you asked the question about the debt, right? So the club don't own the football stadium. So whatever financing is required to develop both the current football stadium and the new one won't be on the club's balance sheet. It's not an issue for the club, actually. The issue for the club at the moment is, you know, we used to own that stadium, which if people don't know, was built by Southend fans in 1955. It was built by the blood, sweat and tears of Southend fans and then gifted to the club by those fans. The fans who built it were granted shares in the club, which I now hold as an heirloom. So, you know, I've got a weird share allocation in the club, over and above.
Has that been diluted down by the owner then? Those shares?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So he's literally trying to get rid of the history. Essentially, he's trying to.
Yeah. So, but those shareholdings are like, you know, still 0.3% as opposed to they did a little rights issue about a decade ago. So there's a lot of people with like 100 shares, but those of us that hold them from the initial shares that were donated to those that built the stadium have rather, you know, holdings that are of multiples of hundreds more or up to 1,000, four-figure holdings. So the club, the fans built the stadium. The chairman came in, decided to buy it and devalued number, transfer it to himself, as well as all the other land assets the club have, with the view to developing them. And he was a property developer. So there's always been this contradiction from day one that John Main is on record and says in the Independent article in 2000. So it's been 23, 25 years of this, to be honest.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of questions about the new stadium. So whilst it's a 21,000 seater, that's what is currently granted under planning permission.
Yeah.
But the chairman has actually submitted a revised planning application some point. I think it was last year or earlier than that.
Yeah.
For only 16,000 and a three-sided stadium. I think it's due to the fact that he couldn't find a franchisee for the hotel that was meant to be part of the stadium.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it was due to. I may, let's just speculate. There might be a reason, but basically now there's no hotel, and there's three-sided stadium in the middle of a housing estate, 2 miles outside of town. So very much, if you think about the Kassam Stadium, which many of us have been to, yeah. So that's now what we're looking at. Now the chairman for years has made statements that, from the revenue he would generate off this, he'd wipe all the club's debt. The club would be set up debt-free and have a brand new stadium. It was only when we started to suffer those successive relegations during COVID and lockdown and stuff, and embargoes, that during Zoom meetings with him through other supporters groups at the time, that he admitted that the club wouldn't own the new stadium either. So not only will we not own that stadium, so we'll continue to lease it, but we'll also have a three-sided stand without the revenue stream. So the whole thing is extremely questionable. And I think the entire fan base, the various fan groups, are now united on those questions as to this isn't the panacea that he predicts and projects. Like the club is not going to be any better off in reality.
Yeah, I think fans think that we're now going to end up with a three-sided solar stadium, like Greg said, in the middle of a housing estate, 2 miles out of town. The site is based on, it's pretty rural. It's got like a crossroads which leads to it, and not much else. And then we're ultimately, if the club does ever get sold, you're going to be essentially paying rent to him.
So the stadium that's going to be out of town, then, the big, because he wanted to build, I've got the number here, it's something like a 14-acre training facility. Is that going to be part of that complex, or was the training facility to be elsewhere, or?
So the training ground's actually under development at the minute. The pitches have been drawn out and they've been marked up, and I think there's like porta cabins and stuff.
So does he owns that as well? I take it the club don't own that training facility. That's going to be an asset that he owns solely, and
I presume so, yeah, because he owns the current training ground. So I presume this would be passing on from that. Whether it's on the same site as where the ground is supposed to be, I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's under construction, and apparently the projection is that we're looking to move into there in Q1 this year, which we're now coming to the end of anyway. So it'll probably be the summer before we actually end up moving into the training ground. Once we move into that new training ground, then the current one will be knocked down, and then obviously demolished for housing and whatnot. So that's currently where it is. There is works in motion, whereas previously there hasn't been. But at what cost? We're probably going to end up with a three-sided stadium, like we said, that's soulless, doesn't really have any character, 2 miles out of town, and we're going to be paying him rent.
Yeah. So obviously, you're in court on Wednesday, which is not an easy topic to talk about. But we mentioned before we were recording that you're kind of used to it now. It's like the annual Christmas card that you get, the winding up orders.
Exactly.
Has the possibility of fan ownership been discussed among the fans?
I think in an ideal world, everyone would welcome that fan ownership, but the viability of it is just, pretty much at this point not even worth discussing, because the debts are so huge. It would, via crowdfunding or whatever source of financing. That the fans would generate, it would just be so insignificant in comparison to the running of the club. It would barely touch the sides in terms of the day-to-day financing and stuff like that. So the club's operating at a loss of £2 million a year. So realistically, the club would have to be run so much more sustainably for fan ownership to even sort of be even under consideration.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we'll touch on it a little bit later. You can get donations and things from other fan groups and stuff to kind of help with it, but at the end of the day, if it's not a sustainable business, at some point you've got to kind of say, well, we close the doors, and nobody ever wants to do that with a football ground. Greg, just coming back to you, mate. Obviously, on that fan ownership isn't a possibility due to the debts. But what about a Phoenix club? Because I know that Southend fans have discussed it, or some Southend fans have discussed it anyway. What do you guys think of that possibility? Going down the MK Dons route and FC United of Manchester and that kind of thing. Is that something that you two are open to, or would you just say goodbye to football if the worst does happen on Wednesday?
No, so our ultimate position, and we're on record as calling for 51% ownership of all football clubs in at a minimum, and that's ultimately our goal. Mm-hmm. Just to clarify as well on record, if you look at Southend on paper, it has a big debt, but that debt is all to the chairman. And when I mentioned earlier about the sale and lease back of the training facilities, the fixtures and fittings and the stadium, mm-hmm. That equates to approximately, I think, let's average it out over the 25 years, is 450 grand a year. If you throw on top of that, during the period, a number of accounting periods, is also charged £300,000 consultancy fee. And that consultancy fee has been for the planning application of the stadium, of which is now admitted the club won't own. So why the club is paying
you can't charge a consultancy fee for something that you're not going to own. You wouldn't, you wouldn't pay it in any other walk of life, would you?
Exactly. So extremely dubious. So, it doesn't take a mathematician to work out, if you multiply those numbers by 20 odd years, and then you look at the size of the last published debt, which, they come out with proclamations about £2 million a year funding deficits, but the accounts haven't been published since the end of 2019. They're now well overdue. Yeah. Hence why I suspect they've struggled with the bridging finance, because who would lend to someone who hasn't published accounts since 2019? So we don't actually know what the position is right now, but the debts, when he's challenged on those debts, I mean, there's a couple of things. In the accounts in 2019, he just wrote off £8 million of it out of the blue, just wrote it off.
Yeah.
So our position is the questions need to be asked more forcefully to him of, well, why was that 8 million written off? How was it written off? And why don't you write the rest off? The remaining in the published accounts is about 13-14 million. And so the remainder of that, he claims he doesn't charge. He says, "Oh, I don't charge rent." People challenge him on this, and did challenge him on these rent amounts on the Zoom calls during lockdown, etc. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, I don't charge the rent." And what he means is there's no cash exchange, but of course, in an accounting sense, it's still accrued.
Yeah,
and it still adds on to the liability of the club every year. So if you're a prospective buyer and you come in and say, I want to buy that club, and you look at it and you think, well, there's X million pound of debt on the balance sheet mm-hmm. that I've got to somehow restructure or finance. So he's painted it into a corporate position where the club has no assets, doesn't own its own stadium or whatnot, and also then has tens of millions of debt. So that's the first issue to contend with. That feedback's really bad. Is that me as well?
Yeah.
Do you reckon you need to mute, Perry?
Try now.
It's coming through, yeah. And then your question about the fan ownership, etc., and Phoenix Club. So I think as a result of our organising and successful protests, the existing supporters groups were very keen to include us on those meetings.
Yeah.
And so the very first meeting we attended and discussed was around the Phoenix Club. It was a month before the club potentially went bust.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, if it goes bust, what do we do? And the Shrimpers Trust, being the kind of preeminent supporters group, had done some great work already in terms mm-hmm. of having a list of almost like a documented plan of who to go to, what to do. But it was not really further than reaching out to people if it happened. And so the point was made about, well, realistically, if the club goes under, we need to be ready the day after to just execute, because if we don't, it's definitely you unmuting, Perry, by the way.
I think it's because you haven't got
actually
headphones on, Perry. That's what it is. So it's
I don't think it actually is, because I was on mute for a couple of minutes and I could still hear it, so I don't know if it is, but.
Oh no, it definitely stopped for me when you muted, mate.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I love technology. It's never straightforward.
The point being that as soon as, if the club were liquidated on the 1st of March, any hesitation or question that people had, if the club, if the supporters, a consistent, unified message come out from the core supporters group saying, here we go, we're ready, we've applied to this, this and this, these are the membership requirements, off you go, get involved, we're going to get, we are the Phoenix Club, we're off. People don't have time to think about and worry about it. And let's be honest, we get 6,000 fans a week, which it's not the same 6,000 people, right? So it's
still 6,000 people, isn't it? It's,
Yeah, but the reality is it's probably 12,000 people over the season,
exactly.
Right? And so 12,000 people aren't going to suddenly just stop going to football if you give them an alternative, which essentially is the same group of people.
Yeah.
So especially if you start to really dominate lower leagues, as I think we naively hope to and do in the National League, had we not made somewhat silly managerial and player assignments.
Oh, the National League is a thing of joy, having been here for 20 years.
So we're very much supportive of a Phoenix Club, because it would be on the basis of, we want to carry on supporting Southend, the Southend fans. We believe that the fans are the club, and so if the club no longer exists, then the dream is to have a fan-owned model anyway. So we'd be right behind it.
Yeah,
100%.
Okay, so you've touched on the protests and things, the peaceful protests. There's one planned ahead of tomorrow's game. So, what is it? A march through the streets? What have you got planned tomorrow? Is it a sit-in at half-time, or?
So tomorrow's away at Torquay. Are you going, Perry?
No, I can't make it tomorrow. But I was in on the comms, which are a bit more open in terms of what's allowed and what isn't. I think from Roots Hall at the minute, sort of all banners and propaganda against the Ron White regime are banned. Whereas at Torquay,
I was going to come on to that. Just sorry to interrupt you, Barry, because the chairman was it the last home game, didn't turn up due to fear for his own safety.
I think he's been in hiding, to be honest with you, for probably since Christmas.
The problem I have with that is that I've not seen anything from the protests of Southend when I've been researching for this, and when I've looked at other things before games, seen it on social media, that's ever said it's been violent.
No.
So for him to come out and say, I fear for my own safety, it's straight away, it's a tactic to paint you guys in a really bad light, and to try and turn the media against you instead of having their support. It just seems very underhanded from a guy who is, probably shouldn't be allowed to tie his shoelaces by himself, by the sounds of things.
Exactly, yeah. No, it's a really poor tactic, and it's kind of backfired on him, because I think the reference he made was that at a protest last season in the game against Chesterfield, we lost 4-0. There was a Ron White out banner going up and down the length of the pitch and along the hoardings. And I think at that protest in particular, a fan actually injured himself. Well, I didn't say injured himself. A steward actually pushed the supporter off the wall when fans were encroached onto the pitch and trying to get the game stopped. Actually pushed them off the wall, and there's famously a massive drop from the wall to the actual beginning of sort of the stand in the West Stand at Roots Hall, and this fan actually required medical attention, and had quite a bandage around his head and all that, and it was a pretty gruesome scene, to be honest with you. I saw it from the East Stand happen. So I think that was used as a bit of a stick to beat the protest groups with, in terms of, we're not going to let this happen again. When it was actually people working for the club that actually caused that situation to happen. So that's what's been used. But all the protests that I've been on, looped in on the comms. And everything, it's all been completely passive. It's all been done in the right way. It's all been demonstration without any aggression. So to be honest with you, there's no real reason for it. Like I said, it's just been used as a stick to beat the supporters groups with. Obviously, every other club allows banners and flags and stuff like that. Away fans haven't had a problem getting their banners in, but it's just the home supporters.
It's literally just you guys, which
we're essentially being silenced. So
it's stupid. I mean, because any little support, I suppose, he may have had from one or two people who still thought he could turn it around, that'll disappear when you start turning on the fans, won't it? It's exactly, just not the way to go.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, what it's almost like it's almost like tyrannical behaviour in it now, where he's sort of, trying to silence the people who are kicking up the uproar, and unfortunately for him, that it's now got national media attention. It's been mentioned on Sky Sports. Jeff Stelling's mentioned it. It's been on TalkSport. It's been on various media outlets and stuff like that. So it's getting the traction it deserves. And unfortunately for him, we're probably not going to go away.
No, that's the right way to take it, to look at it. I mean, let's kind of move on to things on the pitch, because you're having a good season. We spoke before we started recording how if you take Notts County and Wrexham out of it, the actual league is pretty tight. I mean, I've got it in front of me now. You're 11 points behind Woking in third, who are having a good season themselves. But between you guys and Chesterfield, there's 5 points.
Yeah,
realistically, you could get playoffs this year and get promoted. It seems so stupid that Wednesday could spoil all of that, and he can't see the bigger picture here, because if he owns these assets, I suppose that. Before we go on the pitch, is there a thought that's crossed your mind, Perry, or you, Greg? Has it crossed your mind that he could openly be wanting the club to go bust and have the houses? Has that crossed your mind?
So I think part of the planning agreement is that he actually can't proceed with. There's basically got to be a football club for as long as those plans are in place. Is what I believe.
Is that written into it? Is it? Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah. So essentially, it has to go ahead. The football club has to be alive for these plans to keep going. There was an insolvency expert on a supporters call that got published this week, and he was basically saying that it would make no sense for him to let the club die, because he stands to earn. Well, I think the estimations are about £500 million, 500 million roughly. So, if he stands to make that much, it'd almost be senseless to let the club go, which did sort of,
that'll put your fears at ease, I suppose, right?
It kind of did, but I think until we get to the 1st of March and actually see the case dismissed, then that optimism is going to be short-lived. So
is that your understanding then, Greg, as well, that he can't build anything on that site if there's no football club?
Yeah, I believe it's a Section 106, I think, is the terminology that was put in place by the council, that it actually stipulates even more broadly, not that Southend United need to be in existence, but a football club for the borough needs to be in existence. So even if the club went under and there was a Phoenix club, arguably, that the existing planning permissions and covenants in place. So, for example, like the reason why they've built, I think Perry mentioned earlier, but the actual training facilities are almost complete now.
Yeah,
like they're done. So the players need to move from the existing training facility over to there, so they can bulldoze the existing training facility, start building houses, which will then release funds for the development of the stadium, etc. But Roots Hall can't be bulldozed until the club move into the new stadium. So the whole thing is intrinsically tied to the club, which is very fortunate from a longevity and mortality perspective. At the same time, our argument and our point is that there's multiple, as we understand it through rumours and grapevines, etc. Multiple approaches have been made, especially in the last 3 to 6 months, in which really he needs to separate both sites. So I don't think this asset stripping is entirely legal, unfortunately, which is why when we come back to the white paper, I'd love to see what's actually in it.
Yeah.
To prevent asset stripping of football clubs, because I bet there's nothing in there. And essentially, we could almost all hold our hands up and say, look, do what you like over at Foss's Farm, which is where the training ground is, and the new, have it, do what you like, but sell the club with Roots Hall. Forget about developing Roots Hall. Whoever wants to buy the club can buy it there in the best faith and at least have a football stadium.
Yeah. I mean, I said before we started recording, I've got so much sympathy for you guys, because we were in the situation where dodgy owners wanted the ground for redevelopment and wanted to move us out of town, and stripped us of assets, essentially took us out of the lease that Price Griffiths had agreed, and nearly put us underground. So I've got no end of sympathy for you. This guy sounds in a very similar mold to him, and I'm not even going to say his name because he doesn't deserve airtime, but he does sound in a very similar mold.
Which is interesting you say that, because I refuse to use his name as well, because a lot of people use his first name.
Yeah.
Like he's some sort of benevolent uncle. Whereas I refuse to do that. You know, I'll either refer to him by his, formal addressee of his Mr. X, or as the chairman of the club, because, it's a bit like referring to an ex-prime minister of the country who was regularly referred to by their first name and was no one's mate, let's be honest. So it's a similar situation here. And the interesting scenario when you talk about raising funds, etc., is you talk about the situation of Wrexham back then, where you had owners trying to force you out. So, as I understand it, there was a winding up petition. Is that right? And
we went to the High Courts. We went to the High Courts to get the ground back. We were there going around with buckets. We were lucky enough to be able to go through the fan ownership. We never went as far as you guys are. I openly don't think we had it as bad as you guys.
So how did Wrexham fans end up owning the club though? Was it a process of administration and that fundraising?
Yeah, so we went into administration, which I know you guys had. We went into administration, and that's how we ended up owning the club as the supporters trust at the time. Yeah. And then obviously part of our agreement to sell to the new owners was that they can't move us off the site.
Right.
It's written into the club's ledger now. They can't move us unless at a time where expansion isn't possible, essentially. If you got to the point where you needed to build a bigger stadium, then that's kind of tough. But yeah, we went through the administration route. We went to the High Courts to obviously get the ground back. That he had done such a dodgy deal that the other two people involved had gone to his house and just signed it on a piece of paper. Nothing legal about it when it was investigated by the judge, and it was torn up straight away. And then we were lucky enough to be able to have the likes of Brighton help us raise the funds, which is, I know what we spoke about before, but we didn't have to raise anywhere near as much as you guys. So
yeah, and I think that's it really, because we're not in the situation yet where any fundraising is utilised to the benefit of the fans.
Yeah, we'll come on to that in a second on the fundraising. Just before we do that, I kind of just want to focus a little bit on the pitch, just a little bit of positivity, so it's not all doom and gloom. And I've disturbed you both on a Friday night to talk about how miserable life is and how the end of the world's coming next week. So on the pitch, Parry, you're having a good season. Yeah. 6th in the league at the moment.
Yeah, we're having a great season. Yeah, and I think it's testament to the squad and all the playing staff that no matter the circumstances we've been in throughout the season, that they've sort of held it together. And to be, when you look at Chesterfield and sort of they've raked in some decent transfer fees and spent a bit of that as well over the past 3 or 4 years. To think that we're 5 points off there, I think it is at the present moment of time, and our players haven't been paid this year yet. Yeah. Is remarkable, really. Kevin Mayer realistically should be up for manager of the season. Pound for pound, he's probably the best manager in this league based on the resources he's had and the outcomes he's delivered. So, on the pitch, it's actually really good.
How do you feel about other teams, Greg, sort of swooping or circling, should I say? They've not swooped yet, but Wrexham and Notts County obviously both been linked to players at Southend. Realistically, that's got to make you guys feel a little bit uneasy, I suppose, that you could lose some of your better players at this point of the season when you're so close to the playoffs, and you might not get much of a say as a club whether they leave.
Probably inevitable, really. I don't think anyone's particularly miffed by it. I think everyone really expects it, given how well publicised the club's issues are.
Because I know Notts County as well have apologised to Southend this week, or the manager has, for coming out publicly and declaring interest, which, to be fair, I thought was quite classy. He's a very classy manager.
But, it was already kind of known. Like there's a lot of rumours about Dagenham and Redbridge being interested in the captain as well. So, Yeah, it's a bit of a sideshow, really. Like, who could blame any of them? They haven't been paid since Christmas, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, um, that would be your opportune moment, wouldn't it? And I think that really talks to last year's failings in terms of the appointment of Phil Brown as manager. He had no non-league experience, bit of an old school manager. Jobs to the boys, liked his faces, brought in a lot of experienced old has-beens who had none of the physical attributes required to keep up with the National League, where it's definitely
It's
more
a
physical,
different ball
hustle and
game.
bustle
Yeah.
league. Yeah,
It's very much a different ball game, isn't it? Me and Perry were saying
yeah,
before how, Perry's seen you guys do it, and I've seen Wrexham do it, where we can play 1 and 2 touch football on the ground, and we can do what we have to do. But actually, when it boils down to it, the league is just about running 5 kilometers extra than your opponent. It's not always about pretty football, because this league, the pitches alone don't let you play pretty football. Wrexham's at the moment is a complete. It's like playing on the park down the road.
As is ours, ours is in a pretty sorry state. That's another failing of the chairman. The rumor, word on the street has it that the lawn services that I think they were using, or the machinery they were using to uphold the condition of the pitch, that provider wasn't paid. So the ground hasn't been able to do his job. It's been in a sorry state for pretty much since November, December time, and it's only thanks to good weather over the past sort of month or so down here that we haven't had sort of waterlogged pitches or whatever, because it'd be completely cut up. Whereas it looks bad now, but it's playable.
Yeah, because you weren't paying St. John's either way, so they
Yeah.
stopped, or said they were going to stop doing games, which obviously then leads to health and safety, which again could damage your promotion push.
Yeah, over the last couple of months, there's been various sort of bit by bit providers and third-party companies not getting paid. So a little while ago, I think when we first got the first winding up order, so this was sort of the back end of 2022, the GPS monitoring technology that the players wear that tracks the obviously the mileage and distance covered and stuff like that, the provider for them wasn't paid, so the players and the staff weren't able to use them going into the back end of last year. Then there was a meal prep company that were bought to the club by someone from the commercial team that were providing meals before and after games for players and stuff like that. They were all of a sudden not paid, and those were taken off the table. Then we had obviously the upkeep of the pitch and the grass cutting services and stuff like that. The groundsman wasn't able to do his job, and then now St John's Ambulance have gone by the way in terms of their medical services are no longer being provided. There is apparently an alternative provider to for the medical services, but
I imagine there would have to be, wouldn't there? You wouldn't be allowed to have the game
if
there isn't.
Game on, I think they were there up until the last home game, which was against Gateshead last week.
So no, they weren't. No, they weren't there.
No.
They weren't there. No, it was the York FA Trophy that they pulled out.
Okay.
But I mean, looked at the league rules. You need one first aider per 1,000 people, I think, is the recommended minimum. Which the physio counts as like one of those. It just has to be someone present in the crowd. So if you've got like
can you imagine how stupid that is, to the fact that a physio though counts as one of those, because those guys are pretty busy during the 90 minutes. They're not going to be able to help.
It's utterly ridiculous, and the game would be stopped obviously and probably abandoned if you had a real. But the irony that most of the fans draw, both to your point earlier about a safety issue, the chairman, who he actually is, I think he's been to one game in like 18 months now. For someone who, quote, fucking loves the club, you idiot, as you tell one of our fans. He hasn't been to a game for 18 months. He I think he waded into the away end at Solihull rather infamously the week before the Chesterfield game that got stopped by the fans. So he just doesn't turn up anyway. So
he's just come out with that to demonise you guys.
And there was a small protest at his house the other day before the game, just a small picket, in which he'd managed to employ 4 of the club's security staff to turn up. as well as 4 police officers. You know, the number of security officials there nearly outnumbered the number of protesters who just turned up at his house in the morning as a kind of picket gesture. To which the police just said, "Well, if this is it, we're going home. Like, I've got some real crime to fight." You know, no one went there with bad intentions. It was the fact that if you don't come to the game and you ban flags, signs, banners, and I kind of get it. I kind of get the whole big Ron Martin out banner, because that was marched up and down the pitch, famously at home to Eastleigh last year, which we actually scored during. It's like a Monty Python moment. Look it up on Twitter. It's amazing. There's actually 20 fans carrying a banner along the side of the pitch because they didn't go on. And the players, for any, it's always a retort to people who say that a protest during the game affects the players. The players actually scored whilst that was happening. And then the following Saturday was the Chesterfield game where, there was probably 20, 25 people behind that banner that entered the side of the pitch. And as Perry mentioned, one of the security staff was overly kind of aggressive and pushed someone directly back. It was a clear assault.
Yeah.
Pushed someone back. The gentleman tripped, fell over, smashed his head open. And on seeing that, like 200 fans immediately then poured down the front to go on the pitch with the justice they'd just seen. So they kind of signed their own death warrant in terms of a match postponement there. And I must say, the support from the Chesterfield fans that day was unreal.
Yeah,
I've got to say that, because everyone's bad for like mocking your opposition and whatnot, but they were joining in all the songs. They were fully supportive. Once people had gone on the pitch, people went over to the way end. Security were trying to confiscate the banner, so the Chesterfield fans took the banner for that period of the game. And the support like we're getting from Wrexham fans, Scunthorpe, Halifax, Gateshead, that's just to name a few.
Yeah,
it's actually really impressive and unreal. And the intention, I think you asked earlier about tomorrow. So we haven't really done anything at an away game yet, but because of the censorship at home games, where not only have they taken flags off, grown men and stuff, but I think there was a girl with what was effectively a pillowcase. She was 11 years old at a game 2 weeks ago with Martin out on it, and the stewards came up and confiscated it from her. That's the kind of level of censorship we're facing at the moment. So we haven't really done an away game yet. And the intention is just really to get as many flags, banners, signs into the ground tomorrow. We're still working on the principle. It might be our last game. We don't know yet.
You've got it. You're now at a point, aren't you? It's every game as it comes.
Yeah. So I think we've already sold 500 to 700 tickets already.
Yeah.
For what is essentially a 4.5-5 hour journey. We took 600 to Notts County on Tuesday.
Yeah, I was about to say that. That's a really good
insane.
turnout for a Tuesday night.
And there was a little bit of social media noise, but I was there, hence why I've still lost a bit of my voice. But there was a little bit of noise on social media about some negative stuff. But in the main, I mean, I came out of the ground at the end and I had to walk back to the city centre, and I was passing Notts fans all the way, and every single one of them was like, "Good luck, all the best. We wish you all the best. Well done, guys." So there might have been a couple of idiots, but to be honest, they were so quiet, bless them. It's quite embarrassing.
Yeah, I think the problem wasn't it?
We couldn't hear anything.
One of the Notts fans, one of the Notts County fans' Twitter pages actually tweeted it. And I think that's what caused more issues than probably what was chanted at the ground, because then all the other fans saw it. Like, Wrexham fans jumped on it straight away. It was like, "Oh, your club's really not." And it was an excuse for Wrexham fans then to have a go. It didn't need to be tweeted. It was like stoking the flames, and
almost, yeah. I think after that, Wrexham gained the support of pretty much all of the Southend fan base in the promotion title race. So I think you gained all of our support with that. So
you're probably the only ones who do support us outside of Wrexham, in fairness, because no one else seems to. Yeah. Everybody else hates us at the moment. But we touched on it there about things that fans can do to support you. You mentioned Scunthorpe, Wrexham, and Notts County to some extent, Chesterfield. Greg, before we start recording, you mentioned about what Scunthorpe fans had done for you, mate. So just run us through what happened and why you don't want it happening again. in that way. You obviously want the support, but what happened? The fans might not be aware of it.
Yeah, so there was a GoFundMe raised in October, November last year for the unpaid staff, and that was unpaid playing staff, which was insane. Like the support it got in 3 days, I think it raised 20 grand, and I think I mentioned there's some statistics of the people who ran it said something like 20% of the donations were from Wrexham fans, believe it or not, which was absolutely fantastic, and it was run for the right reasons. Obviously, to pay people who are hardworking, low-paid staff who weren't getting paid before Christmas, and for very emotive reasons. But I think our issue was that ultimately that money was paid to the club. It was also matched by the Shrimpers Trust with a loan of double that amount of 40,000, without consulting the Shrimpers Trust membership, which is the biggest supporters group in the club, of about 1,000 members. They didn't consult the membership over that. And then the club sponsor also then weighed in to match it with another 40 grand. So 100 grand went into the club, which effectively gave the chairman a stay of execution. And our position was, it's not really our responsibility as fans, whilst obviously we don't want to see people going out without their wages before Christmas. I mean, what a horrendous situation to be in. But we didn't want to, we didn't believe that it's our position to be paying or bailing out the chairman effectively. However, everyone donated to that with the best of faith and in the best wishes. And ultimately, as we understand it, that money did make it to those people. But, anything that goes into the club just is a stay of execution for the chairman. And also, it's the same chairman that the Shrimpers Trust lent him 80 grand back in 2010. Again, without consulting the membership, which was a very contentious issue back then. They lent him 80 grand to clear off unpaid transfer fees to release an embargo. He then missed that repayment deadline as well, that was initially set. Ultimately, he did repay it eventually with interest, but in his own time as usual.
Yeah.
But at that time, when he made that loan, he made assurances to them that they would have a position on the board. Well, guess what? We're 13 years later, and the Shrimpers Trust no longer, still don't have a position on the board. So the promises and the words given by the owner of this football club are completely worthless. So, any and every penny that's given to him, we appreciate that the supporters at the moment are not at a developed point of protest to have a sustained boycott. So someone could argue, well, you go every week and you pay money, but pay the minimal amount. When we pay for a ticket, we expect that in return for a service of a sustainable football club that pays the staff. So if it's not happening, where is that money going? What's happening to it?
Yeah, it's. I imagine there'll be fans listening to that and thinking, it's at the time they thought it was great that they would donate the money to the club, but on the bigger picture, how many times is this guy going to get bailed out? How many times are you going to keep saving him? And it's very likely that the fans who donated didn't know what the Shrimpers Trust had done and that kind of thing. And
and to be clear, it did as far as we understand, for every assurance, it did go to the unpaid staff. So don't let anyone think their funds are misappropriated, because they weren't. The every intention of it went to where it was meant to go. Just, our position is that 5 months later, look where we are.
Yeah, it's a stay of execution, isn't it?
We're getting, So that's the point. We could afford. We've been under an embargo since prior to that fundraiser. We're still under an embargo because of that. Our youth team have been on strike twice now because of unpaid wages.
Yeah,
like the list is,
it's probably
you mentioned
something...
there, like the unpaid lawnmower.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
John's ambulance. Like, we're getting down to Rangers scenario where they had famously had the unpaid face painter, didn't they, in liquidation as a creditor. Like, this is the realms of lunacy we're getting to here.
Yeah.
It's like comedic.
I think the bigger picture is, as well, is like it just sets a really dangerous precedent in terms of, if we're in a tight spot again, he's probably thinking, oh, the fans and the sponsors will bail us out again and stuff like that. Whereas, I think genuinely, my understanding is because it was in the run up to Christmas and stuff like that, cost of living crisis and whatnot. I think it was sort of done as listen, if we can help them in any way possible, particularly the non-playing staff, because like you said, they won't be on massive wages and stuff like that. If we can sort of subsidise those in the meantime, then the chairman pays back in due course. That was the ultimate goal. But like Greg said, it just sets a dangerous precedent in terms of if this happens in the future, will we do it again? Well, we can't just create a GoFundMe and expect Wrexham fans to part way with their hard-earned cash every time we don't pay our staff on time. So it just it sends the wrong message, I think, in terms of
Yeah, that's it. I think that's the key point. I think to get across there, it's not that you guys aren't grateful. It's not that the fans of Southend are grateful. It's the realization that at some point it's like I've got kids, and it's like if my eldest asks for money because she's broken something, and then 3 weeks later she's broken the same thing again and asks for more money. It's like, how many times am I going to let you get away with breaking it and come to me to pay for the repairs? That's the simplistic view of it, isn't it? That how many times are you going to keep making a mess and keep getting bailed out by somebody else? And that's the big thing. But I've been there. I remember Brighton fans helping Wrexham, and Wrexham fans will always dig in their pocket to help others, and other fans of other clubs will as well. And truly, guys, I really hope it gets sorted. I'm really hopeful that I'll see you on the 11th of March at Wrexham. Already got my tickets, so which is hopefully we'll be able to see you there, and I'm sure the likes of Welshie at the Turf, he'll be more than welcoming to Southend fans. And best of luck tomorrow, guys. I really hope it goes well. I hope you get a good result, and I hope the protest as well goes well, and there's no issues with that. So thank you very much for giving up your time this evening, and I wish you both all the best for the rest of the season, guys. Yeah.